In this video in the STOic TTX Facilitator training, we wanted to go over pro tips. These are the bits of advice that really didn't fit in any of the other sections, but we wanted to make sure we provided some advice to handle some situations that we know arise in tabletop exercises, and we wanted to make sure that you had means to be successful if you run into the same things around your exercise tables. There will be situations around your exercise table where the scenario you've presented, the threats, the details, the injects, some or all of them might not apply. They might be impossible in the environment that they're in, or they're simply not relevant, or that they're perfectly protected against. I mean, it would be so unlikely that the impact would actually happen. Well, the first thing you want to do is to quickly pivot, keep the same details, but now change what they're happening to, what's at risk. So the web server, that wouldn't happen. Great. So now let's shift and move that to another type of server, the email server or the Active Directory server or some other server, the finance server. The second thing you can do, and I've asked this question in a couple different organizations where I've run into this, which is, okay, let's assume it did happen. What had to have happened in order for this to occur? So we ask the participants to assume that the effect has happened and then to work backwards in their own scenario using their own details from their own organization to figure out what must have failed, what sequence of failures or what odd situations might have had to occur in order for that to happen. Now that's great because it puts them into a situation where they're having to use their imagination to think about how the threats might occur that they hadn't thought about. So it's getting them to kind of attack themselves a little bit and put themselves in the situation as being the threat and being the attacker. And this can be really, really, really useful. This is only going to be useful where the participants have the ability to figure that out. If you're at a strategic level, they're less likely to be able to figure out whether or not there are particular paths or particular sequence of events that could occur for a specific outcome to happen. The third thing you can do in that case, where people are assuming and they're really confident and they know that all of their defenses are in place and things can't happen the way you've described them, is to start picking at one of these details or one of these key resources that we're relying on and simply say, well, what if that failed? What if someone tripped over the power plug and that got unplugged? What would happen, right? And so now what you might end up doing is you might change the entire scenario and shift it now, instead of to be this full effect at the end that you were hoping for. Now you're looking at what happens in a much smaller scale. Now the threats are, and might be completely different threats against this one thing, like someone tripping over a power plug for a required resource or something that the organization depends upon working all the time. So you might need to run into these scenarios. Now, this can feel like you're scrambling a little bit, and this can feel very uncomfortable for the facilitator because you're now trying to think of something that might work. But if you keep your head and keep calm and use your curiosity questions and use your consequence questions, you can find some of these different areas and these alternate paths to create a scenario that does make sense for that participant group in that kind of context. One of the things I talk about when I'm introducing tabletop exercises to new organizations, I talk about the experience I had where there was one participant group in a tabletop exercise where aliens landed on the Earth and they were attacking the infrastructure and attacking the organization. The reason why I did this, and this is not something I typically do, this is an extreme scenario, but I want to offer it to you as a potential help for you when you run into a similar situation. Sometimes you've worked with an organization for so long, or they have been working for so long on improving their incident response and improving their skills and their knowledge, that you as a facilitator are really, really, really scrambling to try and challenge them. You don't know what else to do. You have absolutely no idea. You've tried all the tips. You've sort of exhausted the extreme ends of all of your injects. You've pulled out all the details you have from your database or your library of historical attacks for these particular threats. And they're just taking it all in stride. Oh, this is great. This is good news for the organization. They're really, really prepared, and they're adaptive, and they can deal with the risks, and they know how to deal with their resources even when things go wrong, and they can adapt to disasters in the middle of a disaster. Everything's going great. That's a good thing. But in terms for the tabletop exercise to have any value, you need to be able to challenge them. You need to get them into the flow state. You need to get them into a point where they're not sure about things. And in the extreme, what I have done, I've only had to do this once, in the extreme is go fantasy. Have magicians with magic that infects the machines and does weird and wonderful things entirely up to your imagination, and then force the participants to deal with something that is no longer technological in nature and is far beyond the realm of what they think is possible. And then now, how do you deal with this situation? And so it forces the participants to then rethink all of their approaches and their policies and procedures, and start looking at your base principles. What are your goals? What's important? What do we need to protect? How do we handle this? If all rules are thrown out the window, how do we handle this? And this can be useful. This can be a lot of fun if presented well and if the participants are up for it. But if you go pure fantasy, you can find that way to challenge the participants when you yourself have exhausted everything you can think of to deal with next. And it changes the scenario quite significantly, because it's no longer about the specific technical details or the specific steps that would normally happen. You throw all the rules out the window. Aliens land, magicians start, casting spells on the servers, whatever. Unicorns start wandering through the server room. It doesn't matter. You want to completely obliterate all notions of reality and how things normally work, and then force them to respond. And it can work. Like I said, that's an extreme scenario, but I've had to use it once. And so I offer that to you in case you run into a similar situation. One of the things you will run into as a facilitator is that a group discussion like this, where there's a little bit of stress, tends to bring out certain character traits. Now, I'm going to be very, very careful not to say that these personalities that we're going to discuss are the entirety of the person that we're talking about. Sometimes these personalities arise because of certain contexts and certain situations. So I'm not condemning or pigeonholing an individual just to this one small personality. They're personality traits, and you yourself might display any one of these personality traits depending upon the situation or the context or what you are dealing with or the particular stresses that you might have. So this isn't condemning individuals to a stereotype. This is dealing with some of these personalities that might emerge. You might meet all of a sudden at the table, and you might never meet them again, even from the same person. But because of the context, because of the stimulus that they had, they responded in this way. These personality traits that we're going to go through are things that I've seen more than once, and I've seen at various tables, and they're not uncommon. So I want to be able to work through them and provide some tips on how to deal with them, because they can potentially derail an exercise or diminish the value of the exercise for the other participants. So we're not going to stereotype people. We're not trying to shove them into a box. We're not trying to marginalize or minimize who they are as people. We're going to deal with the challenges that certain responses, certain categories of responses have, and what you can do as a facilitator to move forward so that everything's positive for everybody, including the person that is presenting these personality traits. The know-it-all. The know-it-all can be an extremely useful resource for an organization. These are the people who have memorized the network diagrams in their head. They are experts in all of the technologies that they are dealing with. They know absolutely everything, and oftentimes they want to show this in the middle of an exercise. They tend to be the ones that are really dismissive because they have unconscious competence. If you remember from the flow training, they have unconscious competence, and they're no longer thinking about things, and they're almost frustrated or they're bored with the scenario because they know how to handle it. For you as a facilitator, you can handle this situation very gracefully by, as we've gone through training before, digging into their own confidence and their own understanding and looking for those gaps. Asking the consequence questions and the curiosity questions to force them to be evaluating their own knowledge and their own skills in this area. Are they as confident? Are they as competent as they think they are? And this can't be done in a judgmental form. This can't be done in a frustrated way for you as a facilitator. This has to be purely open-ended questions and dig into this. The other thing you can do with a know-it-all is work with them at the table in the moment and say, that's great. What about, I would like to hear from this other participant. How might you handle that? How might you do this? Because one of the things that a know-it-all ends up being in many organizations is a single point of failure. And if that know-it-all is not available to know it all, then the organization suffers. And so if you find that the know-it-all is becoming the focus and becoming the central point of knowledge for everything in the exercise, then one of the things you can do is, as we've mentioned before in the injects, is to, in the imagined scenario, give that person a baby. Have that person's, themselves, their spouse, suddenly give birth, adopt a child, something that pulls them out of the scenario. I used to say this person getting hit by a bus. That didn't go over well in as many organizations as I thought, and people got a little maudlin, and it just got a little dark in some circumstances. So instead of telling them they got hit by a bus and they're now in the hospital and they can't respond, I now go through a more life-affirming option of what if, let's assume you've just had a baby, because they're going to be sleep deprived, they're going to be unavailable, they're not going to be able to participate in an incident, and just push that idea that they're not available for a period of time, for a week or two. Whether or not that's realistic for them or realistic for, in your experience as a parent, or how having a new baby works, doesn't matter. You want to pull them out of that incident so they're not there. And then suddenly you'll start to see where everything starts to break down when they're not available to know it all. The pessimist. You'll run into these every once in a while. These are the people who feel that nothing's going to work, nothing's going to be successful. All the plans, all the participants, all of the playbooks, all the policies, none of them are going to work if an incident actually happened, and they're dismissive the entire time, and they critique everything the facilitator is saying, everything their coworkers are saying as participants. Nothing's going to work. It's all garbage. This can be really challenging because they want the focus to be on them, and they want people to hear and understand their perspective and their opinions, that things are a bigger problem than people realize. This is another great opportunity to be asking consequence and curiosity questions of that individual. Why? It's possible that this person knows things that no one else knows and no one else has been listening to. And they might know that all of the plans and playbooks and all the steps that everyone wants to take, they're not going to work. And that's a very real possibility. So for you as a facilitator, what you can do is get past some of this emotion which comes at you and get them to define the details. Why isn't this going to work? Walk me through it. What's going to fail? Why is that not going to work? And what often happens is that they've taken one small real problem which would create a barrier to having a successful resolution to the incident, and they've over expanded it, right? They've made it a much bigger problem than it actually is. And so getting them to define the details and how exactly it would have an impact or prevent success can help pull some of that emotion away. You also want to be able to record that. You want to record what these details are because it's a gap. It's something that they are very serious about is going to be a barrier to the organization being successful. So yeah, you want to be able to record those things. So the pessimist, a vocal pessimist, wants to be heard and wants to be taken seriously. You as a facilitator, your job is simple. Understand them, understand the details, hear them, make sure they feel heard. And 99% of the time, once they feel heard and that they've been taken seriously, They're no longer a pessimist anymore. So this is a good thing. When you've got this wave of pessimism coming at you and this wave of emotion coming at the table, get them to define it, get them to walk through the steps specifically, and make them feel heard. The right one. This is a little bit like the know-it-all, but this one might not know it all. They just think they do. This is not a single point of failure. This is someone with opinions, lots of opinions that they know what ought to happen regardless of reality. These can be especially challenging for a facilitator. And the right one has what they think is the ultimate knowledge. You will run into situations where you will have a manager or the most senior person, a supervisor, a manager for the participants, acting as the right one. You will have this pop out in terms of this policy says this, or the playbook says this, or the procedures we have established says this, that, and this, and that, and this, and so this is what needs to happen. Or the participants, the incident response teams need to be doing this, that, and this, that, and this, that, so that's what happens, right? And so you have this pressure for the participants to align with what the right one wants to have as reality. This is very, very difficult because this approach, this attitude, and this pressure on the participants hides the gaps that are actually there. You as a facilitator might not get past that and get to those gaps. And this is a real shame, and you need to be able to handle the right one with some grace. What you can do in this instance in order to get to these gaps so that the participants can improve is to ask the curiosity questions and the consequence questions. And if you are getting like textbook answers that don't seem to reflect reality, or the participants are sort of going along with, you can record them as open questions. Oh, so the incident response team records all this information in the ticketing system before doing any containment actions. Is that right? Yes. Oh, okay. Right. So, and looking at the participants are going, okay, and no one wants to challenge the right one. Okay, this happens. So you now, as a facilitator, can write this down. You can write this down as an open question. Do the incident response members record this information? What is the impact of needing to document before doing containment? You can, if you know that there's things there to explore, you can write them down in the open questions portion and deal with it after the scenario as things to confirm instead of needing to resolve that right there in the scenario. The quiet one. There are lots of reasons why people might be quiet in the middle of an exercise. One, they might be expert and they realize that if they said anything, that might skew everybody else. They don't want to be the right one. They don't want to be the know-it-all. They want the rest of the participants to do their thing and get value out of the situation, and they don't want to mess it all up for others. You also have people who are the opposite. They are the junior members. In one instance, I had a participant who had been with the organization for 2 months, right? They're not going to jump in and say anything. They don't know the processes, procedures. They're new to cybersecurity. They don't feel they have anything to say, so they're being quiet. So that's the other end. You also have people who might be competent, knowledgeable, could have things to contribute, but they feel that they're being shut out, that they are marginalized, minimalized, that they are beat down by the other participants or their coworkers, and they don't feel like they have an opportunity or they don't feel welcome to share their voice. The other option is you have people with pure social anxiety. They might know the answers, they might have valuable things to say, they don't feel comfortable sharing, just because that's who they are, and that's okay. Your job as a facilitator is to identify some of these quiet ones, and if your group is around 10, it's usually pretty easy to identify who you're hearing from. Your job is to provide an opportunity, a protected, safe opportunity for these people to contribute. You do not force them to contribute. You do not put them on the spot. You don't shine a spotlight on them. You want to invite them to participate. If you have someone with social anxiety issues or someone who's just not comfortable, simply making it a personal connection between you and them, and with everyone else at the table listening in, of course, making that personal connection and get them to contribute to you, not to the rest of their coworkers, the other participants, can help bring that personal invitation out. And then you can decide what to do from there. If you find out that, oh yeah, this is the person he's the guy who wrote the policies and the procedures and has written all the playbooks, and he just doesn't want to, skew everything and become the center of attention, great, no problem. You can check in with that person for more advanced advice or ideas later on in the scenario. Fair enough, not a problem. If they're a new person, great. Offer an opportunity. Remember to come back to them with something either easy or one of these open-ended questions in order to keep momentum going, to make sure that they have an opportunity to contribute. One of the things you want to do, as I've mentioned before, as a facilitator, you want to give everyone a chance to be a hero in this scenario. You want to make sure everyone can contribute positively. And if you've got someone who's being super quiet and not wanting to contribute, invite them to come in and give them what they need in order to feel like a hero and that they've contributed even one small thing in a positive way to the discussions, and express your appreciation for their opportunity to do that. The judge. This is slightly different from the know-it-all or the right one. The judge doesn't have anything to offer of his or her own. They don't have something that they think should be the answer. They just judge other people's answers. This is kind of like a pessimist, but the pessimist has something very, very specific to say. The judge is just judgmental. This often happens when you've got people who are having a really, really bad day. Things are going really, really wrong for them at work and their personal life, and they're forced into this scenario which is open and imaginative and collaborative and interactive, and they do not want to be there. And this behavior is this pushing away of everything, and being forced to deal with a disaster is not what they wanted to deal with today. They don't know how to handle this, so this is how they're handling it. They're just shutting down everything around them because they just want this to be over. The judge can be very, very difficult in a tabletop scenario. It really, really can be, because they have nothing to contribute. They have nothing they want to contribute. All they want to do is to tear down. At that point, what you can do is offer them hope. Offer them that things aren't necessarily as bad as they think, and as they bring down other people, especially if they bring really pointed judgments to other individuals, is to remind them and to remind the participants this is an open place to make mistakes, and that mistakes should be better made here than in the middle of an incident, and then to offer the judge an opportunity to provide something valuable. Okay, so you're not liking this response, you're not liking how these steps are going. What would you suggest instead? What would you like to see happen instead? And oftentimes, if you do that a couple times to the judge, and if they truly don't have anything positive to say, they'll get a little hand wavy and say something generic, and that's fine. You do that a couple times, they will tend not to push back again, most of the time. The judge is admittedly probably the most difficult for me to deal with. Mostly I try to empathize with the fact that this is not what they want to be doing right now, that this exercise isn't what they want to be doing right now, and to provide them an excuse and provide them freedom to simply not engage with the exercises if they don't want to. If they don't want to be here, that's okay. Maybe next time they will. Maybe next time they can be. We're here to have fun. We're here to be interactive. We're here to discuss. We're here to make mistakes. Let's all do this together, and let's explore where our gaps are and how we can fill those gaps, right? And usually, if the judge is not wanting to be there, they'll either leave, and that's okay. That's perfectly allowed. Or they'll just be quiet for the rest of the time, sometimes with some snide remarks tossed in every once in a while. You can ignore those. And I can't end the pro tips video without the biggest recommendation and piece of advice I can give you as a facilitator. You are not going to get better at facilitation by listening to videos, reading the manuals, taking courses, and doing things by yourself at home alone. You will only get better as a facilitator by facilitating. I encourage you that once you have gone through these videos, you've taken notes, you've built up the different tools and resources you think you might need, you need to get in front of people. You need to start doing tabletop scenarios. If you want to practice your skills in a tabletop role-playing game, that can be a useful thing too. There's less risk. You will find that even if you are inexperienced as a facilitator, maybe not experienced as a cybersecurity person or an incident response person, if you're feeling like you are at the bottom of the rung of the ladder and you feel that you can't do facilitation for cybersecurity tabletop exercises because you haven't earned the right, or you don't know what to do, or you feel you might not know the right things to say, I encourage you to put those thoughts aside. You will provide value to any participant group in any exercise by empathizing with them, working with them, and getting them to answer their own questions, getting them to respond to these things, because simply an outside perspective can be so, so valuable. You might struggle in certain situations, all facilitators do, and that's okay. My encouragement to you is to get out there, get in front of people, and actually start facilitating. I promise you that after 4 or 5 tabletop exercises that you've done, you will feel like an expert. You're not going to know everything and you haven't mastered all the skills yet. That's okay. But right now, if you go back to the flow video where I talked about the 4 stages of skill acquisition, you might be feeling that you are in unconscious incompetence. You know you're going to fail and you're not going to know why you're failing, and you know it's probably not going to go well. That might be what you're feeling right now. Well, it's probably not as bad as you think, and the only way to get past that is to start doing it more so that you can get to that conscious incompetence where you're failing at things and you can identify those things and why you're failing, and there's things you need to work at. But the only way to improve at those is to keep doing it, because you can't practice at home alone. You can't practice on your own. You're not going to get better by reading more or listening to more or seeing more videos. You need to get out there. You need to get in front of people and run scenarios, however that's going to take. And I know that feels daunting. I know that feels scary right now, but I promise you, after 4 or 5 different scenarios, you're going to feel like a master at so many parts of the facilitating skill set. And I'm excited at the possibility of seeing you out there, of seeing more facilitators getting out there and doing this more, because as we've said at the very start, tabletop exercises are incredibly important and incredibly valuable for every organization to get better at incident response and to be able to be more resilient when things go wrong. And you are a big part of that. Even if you've never done facilitating before, just doing one tabletop scenario means that you have improved the organization in measurable ways. So thank you very much for taking this training, and thank you very much for watching this Pro Tips video. But your biggest advice that you're going to have is to actually get out there. You need to just simply run scenarios.